All right. So we are nearing at least our journey, or the end of our journey through Numbers. We have a little ways to go, but we have a lot of action going on in this chapter. And then there's a little, or one of the smaller parts of this chapter actually has some very interesting ripple effects. So one of the things we're going to focus on today is the bronze serpent and like what in the world is going on with that? Because we can talk about the battles, we can talk about their approach and all those things. But I also want to spend some time on what in the world is going on with these snakes. So before we get started, any thoughts or questions or opinions to start us off? Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, I started reading and I 21, 1 through 3. I thought, why do they have to destroy an entire civilization before they move on?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah, this is really starting to get to the God-sanctioned destruction, which is, I think, one of the harder parts of our scripture to grapple with. Is this seems like it has God's stamp of approval, and it's not just, it goes beyond defense, like self-defense at this point. It is going towards annihilation. It is going towards remove these people from the face of the earth. And so I wrote it on a note so I can make sure we circle back to that. But I will say up front, this is one of the times where the Bible does not agree with itself. And this is one of the it's actually a pretty big contradiction. In the one side, there is, we destroyed everything. And on the other side, there is, well, maybe they didn't. And so what's going on with the God-sanctioned destruction, but also maybe they didn't? So, but yeah, I think the question of like, why would they do this is a very interesting question to linger on. Any other thoughts at the outset?
Why are they doing something that was magical from Egypt?
Yeah, there is actual magic in this section. The bronze serpent is very much, it is just magic. There is very little other ways to explain it other than they create a magical object. Its origin is one of those where there is debate there, but
okay, my book says ancient Egypt, so just,
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that's more of a yes and situation.
Yeah, it says the bronze serpent was an object of popular worship during the Israelite monarchy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So let's go ahead and jump in. I feel like I've shown you all the maps enough that I'm going to trust that you have a general idea of the trajectory of where they are going. Or do you want me to bring up one of the maps again just so you can get a fresh visual? What do you think?
bring it up.
Bring it up?
It.
Okay. So
Yes.
as I bring this up, I need to find it real quick. The one thing that my notes were saying is that this, halfway through this chapter, it does seem to switch in its understanding of geography. That later on in Numbers, they will give an actual like account of like all the places they hit or they like camped and everything. This, here we go. What the journey that it describes right now is not included in that. So the general understanding is that they, remember, we're starting in Egypt, go all the way down. Here is like where the covenant and the 10 commandments happen. They go up. They initially want to attack, or God says to attack from the south here. This is where like the spot they were with their spies. They get scared, so they don't. They eventually go over, I really should check this out. I don't know which direction they went. Whether they initially went to the right and up and then back down, or whether they went up left and then back down right. At any rate, they went up close, they came back down, they eventually tried to talk to Edom. Edom did not, Edom was more willing to attack them than let them pass through. And so this is the point where they're heading back down and around, so it seems. However, the chronology of these events, what they think is happening is that there is the priestly tradition of where they, like the towns and places they hit, versus the old epic. So there seems to be a tradition that was like the lore of the conquest of the people of Israel, and that doesn't necessarily cohere with the priestly sources, so we're a little bit off script. It does seem to be like, once again, a mushing of traditions. But where we are going to be talking about today is not in this area. We're talking more up here. This is the very last, like they're doing this whole push in our chapter today, and they're going to be hanging out here they basically camp up here before they make their westward approach to the land of Canaan. Any thoughts, or does that help put it in perspective of where exactly we are on the journey?
Yes, it does.
Okay, cool.
And am I to understand correctly, they took the Ark of the Covenant with them this whole journey?
Yes. So this is why a few chapters back if you remember, we read briefly that the Levites, they're like that whole tribe, even though there's been a significant reduction in their numbers, their job is to pack up the tabernacle. There's a specific group of people to carry it. So they don't have livestock. They don't carry their own possessions. Their whole thing is to carry the ark, to carry the candlesticks, to carry the table, to carry the tent. So the Levites are in control of that. And generally speaking, the Ark of the Covenant goes first because that is the representation of God. So in their minds, the Ark of the Covenant is where God is. So that goes ahead of everyone.
Well,
Survived all these wars and nobody went after it.
Not at this point. There is issues with that later on. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
if the Ark of the Covenant goes first, what if they meet hostile forces? I mean, they keep fighting with everybody. How do they protect the Ark?
Theoretically, God protects God's self. It doesn't need protection. God's there.
In reality, though, when they're in battle, I mean, it could be very vulnerable. Okay, so I'm lost in minutia. Okay, goodbye.
I wouldn't think too hard about it. If you do want a fascinating story, this is a lot later in the tradition. I want to say this is during the time of King Saul, who is the first king of Israel. David would have been like around at this time, but there's an enemy that does capture the Ark of the Covenant because it's a box of gold. Who wouldn't want to steal it? But basically they get visited with plague after plague, and the people are like, this is a bad idea. And they put it on an ox cart, and they're just like, go away. And they just like hit the ox so it starts walking, and it like just walks right back to the people of Israel, and they're just like, that box is cursed. You people keep your cursed box. And so there is a story of it getting captured, but like I said, God can defend God's self, and that's normally in the form of plagues. Alrighty. So once again, why they think that this is a little bit out of order, or like there's a question of timeline, is the first group that they attack is the Canaanites, which they're trying to go into the land of Canaan. So they think that this first chunk is definitely out of place. But that is neither here nor there. I think at this point, we kind of understand the chronology of things and we can put the history side of it aside. Let's talk about the narrative and what's happening. And I think that'll be the best way to kind of tackle some of these concepts. So the people are, there's this first battle. They are attacked. Let's see. It's the King Arad who lives in the Negev, and he sees Israel coming, and so he like preemptively attacks, because once again, there's this huge group of people that seem to be at least semi-armed, let's attack, but also they have sheep, and if we kill them, we can take their sheep. That's great. And this, at this point, this group of Israelites says in verse 2, if you will indeed give this people into our hands, we will utterly destroy their towns. And so this is their vow. Commentators will say that this is the declaration of a holy war. And we see this declaration in a few places. But I want to think, before we think about what it means to want to annihilate people, I first want to think about the difference between this response to Canaanites attacking versus how the people responded when the spies came back and said, there be giants here. We're scared. We don't want to do it. There's giants. God help, or send us somewhere else. Whereas now, theoretically, it's their kids and their grandkids, and their response is, God, you help us win this battle, and we will do your bidding and wipe people off the earth. So it feels very opposite, but I'm curious of your all's opinion of what has changed, or the just thoughts on the difference between these two responses about the Canaanites. Yeah.
Previously, Moses had been doing all of the communication between God and the people. But then in verse 2, it says, then Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, whatever. And the Lord listened to the voice of Israel. Now, are we to assume the voice of Israel is Moses? Or
Not necessarily, no.
is the consensus that, they're all talking? I mean, okay, explain this to me, because I don't get it. For me.
Well, isn't Moses sometime referred to as Israel?
So Moses
that-
is not. It was Jacob who was renamed Israel. So
Okay.
when it talks about Israel, it kind of uses it like a first name, but when
But
it's
it
when it's
doesn't
talking
refer
about
to
Israel, this is the people kind of talking in unison, more or less.
Okay.
So,
Right.
Mary Ellen, your assumption is correct in that Moses is not being a go-in-between right now.
Okay.
This is the people speaking directly to God.
Okay.
So they are, the other thing is, like, Moses at this point isn't saying, go do battle, like he was before. Like, he's like, okay, let's go, and then they're like scared. This is the people saying, okay, we see the challenge ourselves, let's do this. So what kind of transformation what transformation happened between the old generation and this new generation? Like, what do we, like, that's a difference of opinion there. Yeah.
Well, they're initiating their action, first of all. And secondly, they're not whining and crying and carrying on like their parents did. They're I don't know, they're much more positive in what they're doing and where they're going than the whining and crying people we saw through the no water and nothing to eat and whatever. So I see that as a big change.
But that doesn't last long.
No.
We'll get to their complaint in a moment. Helen, yeah?
Well, it just seemed like they seemed to have more faith in God than the earlier people did. The people before were always complaining and carrying on about things, whereas these people seem to accept what God says and try to do it.
Yeah. So I want you to put yourself in the heads of these children who grew up with this promise, but who have kind of lived this nomadic life. So they've been told that their parents had this glorious exit from Egypt. They were told that you are no longer slaves. This is what God is doing. Like theoretically, they're keeping the Passover, they're telling the stories, they've heard this again and again, but also they're being told that, hey, we didn't want to go up there just yet. That's why we're still here. We're eventually going to go there and you are going to get this promised land. We freed you from Pharaoh, but there's this promise that you are going to get to live out. And so they've grown up hearing this story, and all of a sudden it's time. Clay, yeah?
Technical business. Could you unmute Sue?
I am trying to. I
Oh,
think she's
okay.
having some technical difficulties here.
All right. She said she can hear everything, so hopefully she heard that.
Okay.
All right.
Sue, I am sorry. I can try to request a few things to see if I can get you being able to join us. All right. But yeah, so these kids have grown up with with hearing of this promise, and now it's go time. So what do you think that feels like for them who, they've heard this promise, but now it's like, okay, God has given the go ahead. There is a perfect, abundant land. You just have to work for it. Can you think of things like in your own experience where it's like you've been there's a promise that you've kind of had put in front of you, and all of a sudden it's time and you get to go for it, you get to work for it. That feeling of freedom, I'm almost thinking about the transition from high school to college, being under your parents' wing, being told things, having your own having curfews and all of that, and all of a sudden you go off and there's this promise that college is going to be the best years of your life. You get the freedom and you get to get that push and told to go. Or other times where all of a sudden you're graduated, you don't have papers anymore, and you're given that permission to go out into the world. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
I was thinking about having an interview for your ideal job.
Yeah.
It's everything you want it to be, but you have to get through the interview and the prep that you would do before that. So that came to mind when you were talking.
Right. So that's a great example, because there's also it's a double-edged sword. It's not like it's your ideal job, but you're still gonna have to work for it. It's not like it comes on a plate and you just get to sit back, but there is the excitement and there's the work.
Yeah. And then there's the actual, interview itself, or in their situation, the confrontation with these people, where an interview isn't a battle, but it is also something that you can think of as, high on the negotiations. So, my story kind of continues a little bit.
Yeah. So we can kind of start to understand why they're a little bit more gung-ho than their parents were about this. They've likely led a more sheltered life, and now it's their time for glory. So let's go ahead and do it. But this brings up one of the initial questions we had of what, like, here we see a promise that it's like, hey, God, we are more than happy to do the work. If you give these people into our hands, we will annihilate them. It's not just like we will dispossess their king. It's not like we'll replace their rulers. It's we're going to kill everyone and take the town. And so, and it seems like in these verses, they do that. And I told you there's a contradictory narrative, and that's, or we will see this narrative of they won, they killed everyone, they killed everyone, they killed everyone. But at the beginning of the book of Judges, what you will see is after the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, who shall go up against the Canaanites and fight amongst them? So we're told that the Canaanites are wiped out, and then in the next book, it's like, oh no, the Canaanites are still here. So we just know for historical records, they don't kill all the Canaanites. They don't kill all the Amorites. The Moabites are still going to be in the land. All of these tribes still exist. So that's the contradictory narrative. They say they kill everyone, but we know for a fact they don't. Even by the biblical narrative, we see these tribes pop up again and again and again. So let's first talk about this, like, let's kill everyone. And I think we've kind of grappled with this before, but is there a way to understand this as a narrative rather than like a historical like commandment that we should fulfill even today? Like, how do we grapple with this kind of a vow and God's stamp of approval? Does it make us feel better to know they didn't succeed in killing everyone, or is that just kind of, yeah, Larry?
It's more the act itself that speaks for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, the whole idea of, God, here we're going to go in there and try to kill, even if they don't kill all of them, they're certainly going to kill a lot of them. You know, well, is it better to kill everybody or just a few?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, I'm seeing them destroy the towns that are along their pathway toward their goal. I don't see them leaving the path and chasing down the Canaanites in their towns that are farther distant, where that would be their primary goal, is chase them all down and make sure you wipe out every Canaanite you can encounter. Their goal is this pathway north. And so, you know, maybe the major Canaanite towns were along that route, and they did conquer and murder all of the people along their way, and maybe wipe out the leadership as well. I just don't see them going off in the country chasing down every single one of them.
So in that description, that kind of pulls a distinction between like herding people up into concentrated areas and then strategically eliminating them from existence. This is just like, you're in our way, move. And if you're in our way, we're going to get you out of our way. And so it's almost a ends justify the means approach of like, get out of our way, rather than we hate you as a group of people and therefore you don't deserve to live. That's kind of what I'm hearing. And I don't know if it makes it better or not.
Well, it changes what their goal would be. Whether their goal is to keep moving toward the promised land, or whether their goal is to wipe out entire populations of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're sticking to their goal.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair way to interpret it. It's not that like murder, in my opinion, is still bad. Killing whole towns is still bad, in my opinion, but somehow it feels better for it to be like we are trying to make, their goal is not the death itself. Their goal is not the extermination. Their goal is this like they have, or the people in the area have something they want, and so they're going to take it.
Okay.
So with that in mind, we'll come back to the fighting and the that whole discussion. But let's take a moment because we have one more complaint story. And my commentary says this is the last time they
Oh,
complain.
really?
So I'm gonna ask the thing that I keep asking with all of these complaints. What is similar and what is different in this complaint? And this is the very last one we have, and there are some notable differences. So what do you all notice is different here, and what's kind of the same thing, new, different space, same complaint?
Well, they're coming out of Egypt to die in the wilderness. There's no water. We detest this miserable food. Sounds very familiar.
Right. Yeah, Larry?
It says they complained against God as well as Moses, whereas before they only complained about Moses.
Right. So once again, we see this group of people is more than willing to talk directly to God. And so God is the first
Mhm.
in the line of the complaint, or the direction of the complaint. It's not like, hey, Moses, what are we gonna do? It's, hey, God, your food sucks.
Mhm.
There's no water here.
Yeah, I know.
So that's a major difference. And it's actually seen as why this one is the most severe of the complaints, is because it is direct.
Mm. Does that explain God's response then?
It is thought too that this is why this response is a little bit more severe, is because
Yeah.
it was a direct complaint. So is there anything that's missing here from the other versions?
Missing, or, I can do it different.
Okay, what's different?
This is the first time that the Lord sent a plague to the Israelites, where he sent the poisonous serpents among the Israelites.
Mhm,
And they bit the people so that many Israelites died.
mhm.
I don't recall a time when the Lord sent, the easiest word to me is a plague, to his people. Am I missing something?
I am not positive that that's true. I
I
just
thought
don't
he
have a
said-
direct reference. Yeah, Larry?
I thought in a previous time he sent a plague against a portion of people that sort of complained or did something anyway.
Yeah, I have a vague memory of it saying that there was no description. It's just like God sent a plague and then Moses prayed and then it left.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's been towards the whole company of people or a portion of it.
Yeah. The other
But-
thing that's different about their complaint here, they don't say they were better off when they were in Egypt. whereas before they've always said, we ought to go back to the good old days when we were back. But of course, this generation wasn't in Egypt, were they?
Right. And that is one idea of why they needed to change generations before they made this approach. There is no let's go back to Egypt. They don't remember Egypt, and it's just the complaint is more, this sucks.
Yeah.
There's no good old days here. And the other difference that I would point out is Moses doesn't intercede beforehand. Moses doesn't go to God and say, God, what do I do with these people? And that's because the complaint is directed towards God first. And so you don't have Moses being like, these people are gonna drive me up the wall. So that part's missing. Yeah, Gary?
Another thing is that this generation felt comfortable turning on the manna and hating that, whereas the earlier generations, I still had a little bit respect for how it had saved them.
Yeah, they're not a fan.
Relate to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you grow up eating the same thing every single day, I wouldn't be surprised if even cake gets tiring after a week of it. But there is an understanding that it's like, I mean, yeah, but I do see the disrespect. They don't understand. They don't fully comprehend its position in their lives. So what God's response is, here's a bunch of snakes, serpents. In my Bible, it's translated to poisonous serpents. The actual Hebrew says basically fire snakes. And they think it's because the bite of the serpent had like a fiery feeling. That's their assumption. That's a guess. But they're fiery snakes that are being sent out into the people. Many people are dying. And then when Moses then intercedes and says, we have sinned, help us. And God's instruction is to make bronze snakes, put it on a pole and hold it before the people, and anyone looking at the bronze snakes will be healed. And this is why it is just pure magic. It is like you look, it's sympathetic magic, I think is the technical term. You look at this image of snakes and you're going to be healed. So what are your thoughts on this solution to the snake problem? Any initial feelings with it?
You could have just taken the snakes away,
Yeah.
just eliminated them.
So let's look what I spent a lot of time doing just before I logged on was looking up images of snakes, because snakes are very common, or like snake worship was common in the ancient world. One of the thoughts is that there's a belief that snakes were actually eternal, like undying beings. Because of the way they shed their skin, they thought that snakes never died. Or at least of natural causes. You, of course, could kill a snake, but there's a thought that they were eternal beings, which made them objects of worship around the ancient world. So let me pull up some images, because specifically, this was there was snake worship in Egypt, but there is also snake worship in a lot of other areas. And so this one is a recent, or a semi-recent, in the past 50 years, discovery of a Canaanite shrine. And so this is like a little votive area where you could put offerings or things. But we see on top, there's a bunch of little snakes on it. And so so snake worship is associated with the Canaanite region, but specifically, if I can, there we go. It is associated with this dude, which is the Canaanite storm god. So the Canaanite storm god is another god that is God that is in the sky. This is a typology that we see in a lot of Indo-European pantheons. You're thinking Zeus was storm god in the sky. We think of Odin and Thor as being, once again, well, Thor is lightning god in the sky. Odin is sky daddy. This is another storm god in the sky, and evidently he has snakes associated with him, sometimes in one of his hands. So this is why in the Canaanite world, this dude has snakes around him. But this is a Greek statue from the Minoan civilization, and this is a goddess with snakes in her hands. And then let's see. Oh, that's the storm god. Hold on, here we go. Here's another one where this is a vase that once again is from like the same region where we see these two intertwined snakes. This one is evidently a vase. We also see this in other Greek mythology because this becomes the symbol for medicine, and I'm blanking on my Greek god who is the god of medicine, but this is still today like the symbol you will see on ambulances. And of course it's also in Egypt, as Clay was saying. So snakes are all over the place. But specifically their neighbors, the place where they're going into, had a lot of snake worship. They think that this is why in the Garden of Eden, the enemy is a snake. It's because other gods were associated with snakes. Anyways, the weird thing is in this story, the snake is held up for healing. So, with that context, how do we feel about this magical element with snakes in it? Does it feel a little bit odd that other cultures' religious symbol is kind of being used as a healing object in this story? I see a nod from Clay, yeah. Larry, did you have a thought there?
Well, it just seems like God is holding up or telling Moses to hold up an idol. I mean,
it does.
I mean, you're not supposed to be worshiping idols or looking to idols for help.
Yeah.
Yet God says, "Hey, Moses, make an idol."
It's a good point.
Yeah, Clay.
Well, it's a very easy way out. This is really easy. Make this and you look at it and you're cured. That seems really like an easy way out of this problem.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, Larry?
The other thing it brought to mind to me, remember during the AIDS epidemic, we had a big problem with people getting allergic to latex. You know, there were all sorts of people having terrible reactions to latex, all right? To the point where some people, when they walked into a store that sold tires, had attacks and got terribly ill from looking at the tires. There was absolutely no latex allergen in the air. They were not breathing any latex. It was strictly looking at that gave that reaction. And this is sort of the obverse of that. You know, you've been bitten by the snake, you look at the idol and you're cured. Brain is the most potent organ in the body, and it'll control everything.
Larry, you just reminded me of a really funny story from when I was a camp counselor. So I was a counselor on Higgins Lake up north, and if you know, in that region, there's an issue with duck itch, which basically there is a parasite that's in the duck droppings that parasite tries to burrow into human skin, it will die. It cannot live in us. But as it's dying, it is extremely itchy. And so we would slather the kids' legs up, and it was only like the first 5 feet of the water that had this problem. So you would just be like, run, just run past it, and normally there'd be fine. But inevitably, there'd be one kid that spent way too much time in the shallow end, and they would get it. But the problem with one kid getting it is they would start itching, and then the other girls would start thinking about their legs, and then they would start itching, and you would have an epidemic of girls crying because their legs itched so bad. And I was the counselor for the little girls' cabin, which like there was 2 wings of it, and it was the biggest cabin in the camp, and so there was like all these like kindergarten and first grade girls, and all of a sudden they are all itching and they're all like on the verge of mental collapse. And there was one girl who pipes up and says, "My mom said that toothpaste is a way to get rid of the duck itch." And I'm thinking to myself, that is entirely incorrect. That there is no way that toothpaste can get rid of this. But my second thought is, toothpaste has minty feelings in it, and mint feels medicinal. And so I was like, oh yes, 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 please slather your legs with toothpaste, because it felt like it was working. And it was a great way to diagnose which girls actually had the duck itch problems and which girls it was all in their heads. Because if the toothpaste worked, that means it was in their head. And if they were still itching, I could take them to the nurse's station and actually get them the anti-itch cream, because I wasn't going to take a cabin and a half full of girls to the nurse's station. So I don't doubt if people are getting bit by snakes, there's some people who are actually getting like the poison, and then there's other people who probably are just hysterical. But with that in mind, let's actually talk about how this has some weird touch points throughout some biblical history. So the first one I didn't tell you all to read, but because it's just one line, but I do find it interesting. As we said, this looks like a Canaanite god or Canaanite shrine. There's things items of worship that look like what Moses just made. And this becomes an issue later on in the kingdom. So this comes from 2 Kings chapter 18. So this is long, long after King David. This is after the division of the northern and the southern kingdom. This is actually after the northern kingdom gets hauled off into captivity. So the northern kingdom does not exist, but the kingdom of Judah does. And there is this new king who says, hey, they were idolatrous up north. They were sinful. That's why they got hauled off into captivity. We need to make some reforms down here in Judah so same thing doesn't happen to us. So this is King Hezekiah. So I'm gonna just read a little bit, and I want you all just to like pick up the mention that of this object. In the 3rd year of King Hoshea, son of Elah of Israel, Hezekiah, son of King Ahaz of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. His reign lasted 29 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Abi, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, just as his ancestor David had done. He removed the high places, broke down the pillars, cut down the sacred pole. He broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it, and it was called Nehushtan.
Wow.
So it seems like this item was kept and then was used as an item of worship. Probably it was thought to be medicinal, that it was like one of those things that you make offerings to it if you are sick, because there does seem to be a connection with snakes and illness. There is some, like, on and off throughout history, people have tried to use snake venom as a medicine. And so it is likely that this is a minor shrine for healing. Yeah, Larry?
Did the Israelites have a lot of that sort of thing? I mean, were there a lot of sort of minor artifacts that they gave offerings to? Maybe didn't worship exactly, but at least gave some sort of credence to.
This is the consistent problem with Israel and Judah. So at this point, this is where it gets really confusing, because we often use Israel to refer to the whole region. Once the kingdom divides, Israel is only to the north and Judah is in the south. But both of them have the problem where they incorporated Canaanite polytheism. And that is one of the reasons why God wanted the elimination of all the Canaanites, was because God didn't want the polytheism. He didn't want the other pantheons. God didn't want the incorporation of these other things. But because this people went into a land that was already inhabited, two things happened. They intermarried with each other, and they took on each other's culture. So it seems like once a holy place developed, you can rename it as like Yahweh's sacred mound, but people still remember when it was Baal's sacred mound. And so there's a little bit of like mixing and adding in other things from the pantheon, and just other things from other cultures would slowly creep in. So it is a constant problem that the kingdoms have, is the incorporation of other gods, other items of worship, whether it's family deities, whether it's the snake thing. They have a very hard time not being polytheistic. We kind of think about this story as like the onset of monotheism, and that bam, there's never like, that's all they ever do. These people are still in a polytheistic world, and they very much have a hard time with monotheism. They just struggle all the time with it. So, yes, it is common. Yeah, Gary?
Well, but it was God that introduced the snake as
Yes.
being a healing positive thing. So it's like he was trying to get them to maybe have some type of a respect for the Canaanites.
I mean, it is interesting that like this is.
But
say that again?
It's a stretch, but
no. Huh.
So, yeah, I mean, it's like I always say, history's messy. So, but with that, let's us actually turn to the other reference that we have that is in John 3.
Yeah.
I told you to read the whole thing, and it's purely just for one line, but kind of to see it in context. This is early on in the Gospel of John. This is the conversation with Nicodemus, who is a Pharisee. Notably, the next big conversation that Jesus has is with the Samaritan woman at the well. And I think that kind of commentary is interesting because the Samaritans are part of what was formerly Israel, and they had an even harder time with the polytheism of incorporating polytheism from the rest of the areas. Anyways, but what we find is in conversation with Nicodemus, Jesus starts is talking very cryptically through this whole thing. But in verse 14, he says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. So I'm curious, if you had ever noticed this reference before and were like, what the heck? And what does it mean to you now? Like, especially in light of the fact that Sunday was Easter, what do you make of this reference?
Well, they both come under God's direction.
Mm-hmm.
And, Jesus is saying, God told Moses to lift up the serpent, and God is going to lift up the Son of Man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's thought that this is a prefiguration of literally Jesus being nailed to the cross and lifted up before the people. And comparing it to the serpent makes it sound like the cross was for the healing of the people. Is that often a way we think about the crucifixion, of it being something that is healing?
No, it's sort of overshadowed by the horror of it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to melt down a few necklaces and make a bronze snake. There's another thing to nail somebody to the cross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think, excuse me, I don't think of the cross as healing. I think of Jesus as healing. He was on the cross, of course, but which kind of identifies it as such, but I don't see it as an object. It's an object that's there. It's a miserable thing that happened, but it's not healing to me.
Yeah. Any other thoughts of kind of this parallel or this allusion to the story that we're reading? Okay.
Yours? So that's pretty.
Where?
So I just thought you might find that reference interesting. It's one of those that if we were reading the book of John, I would have you put your thumb in that place and turn to Numbers to read that story. So I would have done it in both directions, but I do think it's interesting when you know that something comes up later on to be like, hey, here's this reference you're gonna come across. And if you don't know this story in Numbers, it sounds very weird to hear about Moses lifting up snakes in the wilderness, and you're like, what the heck? When in Exodus did that happen? Turns out it's in the book we don't tend to read. So moving on from there, we are low on time. So we have the continuation of their journey kind of around Edom and going north. Whereas they are willing to avoid Edom, they kind of send messengers to the next few people they go to, and they give basically the same message. We're going to stay on the King's Highway. We want to stay out of your hair. Just let us pass through, and instead the people in that area attack. And what we find is that the people win a few times. And there's a few other things like sprinkled into these next few stories. And so what with these next, I think we have 2 or 3 battles in the second half of this chapter. What stands out and what's interesting about these battles that they go through in quick succession?
Well, they're singing songs.
Right. We do have, yeah, we have the inclusion of 2 songs. One just seems to be like a water song. Instead of complaining about water, it says God gives them water and they sing this song. This may just be a song that people sang at the well, which is interesting. The second song deals with one of the tribes conquering the other tribe, and it's interesting that this is included because it has nothing to do with the people of Israel. It's just a song about a battle.
Yeah.
One other little interesting tidbit is if you're seeing verse 14, one of the little poetic pieces here says that it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord.
Yes.
Scholars have no record of this book other than this mention of it here, but it does seem like there was excuse me, a book that existed in the Royal Library that like chronicled the battles of the early Israelites. So there's a reference to a book we don't have. And it is interesting that it seems like somewhere there is a fuller epic that describes these battles in detail. And here's a little quote from this book we don't have. And so it's always just interesting to see, hey, there's a book and we have no copies of it.
Again, in description of the defeating King Og, they mentioned that that they killed him, his sons, and all his people until there was no survivor left.
Yep.
Which nowadays, I guess, are they just talking about wiping out King Og and his family, or did they wipe out all of the people?
So if you look at verse 33, King Og came out against them and they battled on a specific battlefield. My notes are saying that this is like a volcanic flow plain, which means that there is like a flat area. And so this is not just the people of Israel like laid siege to a town. This is like a traditional, these people lined up, and the trumpet sounded and they clashed. And so it may be a reference that they killed everyone on the battlefield.
Okay.
Maybe. So far, it seems like this group of people is a fairly successful militaristic band of people, right? So we are going to talk about the next, so we don't have Bible study next week, but the week after we have one of my favorite stories. I actually preached on this story way back at the beginning of the pandemic because it's so weird and I love it. But I think it is important to remember the setup that we have from this chapter. There is this group of people who's been wandering in the desert. They come out of the desert and they're just killing tribe after tribe after tribe, and we have like kings falling or like tribal leaders falling. We have massacres on battlefields. So I want you to have that image in your head of this group of people that evidently is very powerful, at least in the eyes of the next kingdom up the road. So the next guy is basically looking down the road and he's like, oh no, that town fell. Oh no, that town fell. Oh no, that town fell. And that kind of coming sense of doom, which is going to set up for the next story. The fun part of the story is 22. I also have chapter 23 and 24 as like, you can skim it. I think it is interesting, but you don't have to read it in detail. It is, I'm probably going to focus more on 22. I'm just letting you all know.
Okay.
So we are getting very close to actually the entry into Canaan. The next chapter is basically like the final hurdle they have, and then they're going to camp on the other side of the Jordan. So after all of this time, we're almost in the promised land. So any final thoughts for today? Anything jumping around in your all's minds that we didn't get to?
Well, I like Mary Ellen's approach that they just fought their way through and killed everyone in sight so that they could move forward and keep going. Otherwise, the whole story just is a puzzlement as to why this would be permitted. What kind of creatures would live with this type of mayhem?
If they wiped out whole towns, why didn't they just move in on them? They didn't do that. They kept going.
Right. Yeah, this is the area in the Bible where a lot of people who are uncomfortable with the Old Testament, it's this. Because either between God being kind of vengeful at times, and the other thing is like this is violent. There's no two ways about it, and the ancient world was much more violent than we have today. But this is one of the parts where people go, are we supposed to live? Is this a description of how the people behaved in the past, or is like, are we supposed to live by this now? Like, are we supposed to do the same thing? Because that gets us into some uncomfortable territory. Like, are we allowed to wipe people out if they get in our way? Like, are we supposed to exterminate people? And you get like, and this is where people start wondering about just war theory and kind of wondering, when is it moral to start a war with someone?
Yeah.
Yeah, Larry?
I think it comes down to what's the prevailing attitude of how you win the battle. Do you just have to defeat the army that's out there fighting, or do you have to kill off all the people?
Mhm.
You know, and it often seems in the stories they're out, you know, at least to kill, if not all, a significant segment of the populace, like all the firstborn sons, or all this, or all that. It's often at, you know, everybody, but maybe not everybody in the whole place, but certainly a lot of them.
Well, see, here's where I'm gonna make you all feel uncomfortable again. Is one of the things that gets talked about is that one of the reasons why Israel has a hard time as a nation is the fact that they didn't kill everyone like God's instructed them to. Their problems as a country come because they integrated. And because they integrated idolatrous practices with them. So like, in one hand, it's nice that they didn't fully genocide of people. Like, if you only kill the army, in some ways people are like, okay, that's much more understandable. But they're later put through the ringer because, oh, you didn't listen, you didn't kill everyone, look at all these practices, and you are now being unfaithful and sinful because you didn't. And I think that is a problem too, because I mean, it kind of goes with the assumption, unless you obliterate the native inhabitants, you are not going to be a pure, unadulterated people. And that's a narrative that goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and is one of the conversations that the Bible has no clear answer on. When they come back from exile, Ezra and Nehemiah say, send away your foreign wives. Like, if you brought someone from Babylon with you, send them back. We don't want them. They're going to bring polytheism back with them. Send them away. And then you have Ruth, who is from Moab, who is a better Israelite than the Israelites are. She is this honorable, upstanding woman who is a Moabite. And this is where we have this contradiction of foreigners are awful and foreigners are the best. We have Nicodemus, who is the Pharisee who doesn't get it, and the Samaritan woman who does. And at the same time, there's times where it says don't be friends with pagans, and other times it says, hey, it's okay to go eat dinner at their house, just don't eat meat. So this is one of the constant contradictions, and I think it's wrestling with it is good, but it's hard when it doesn't say one thing, and especially when it deals with war. I would love a proclamation that actually just, once again, it doesn't delineate when it's okay to kill people and when it's okay to not. We have instead this messy, contradictory back and forth of the people. It makes it hard though, doesn't it?
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, folks, shall I pray us out for today?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Let us pray. Loving God, sometimes it feels like it would be so much easier if we just had instructions straight from your mouth of what to do at each moment. is sometimes it seems like it would be easier if we could get clarity, just like you saying, make a bronze serpent and lift it up and you will be made well. But we even see that the people struggled with that and let that, even those instructions, get between them and you. You gave us Jesus and Jesus's teachings to help us understand, and even then we misunderstand his teachings all the time. Sometimes we don't even know what to do with the violence of the cross, just like we don't know what to do with the violence of war in this scripture. But we look to it and to you, hoping to find answers, hoping to find a path ahead, hoping to find healing and love and purpose. And so in this week after Easter, I pray that you be with this group, that we may continue to wrestle, because we are given puzzles instead of instructions. We're left to ponder and draw closer to you rather than assume we have all the answers, and to draw away assuming that we have it all down. So help us in our wrestling and be present in our lives. I pray all this in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
You,
Thanks.
we miss you, Sue.
Yeah. Hopefully we can get that worked out soon.
Have a great week, everybody.